Hello and welcome to Very Much Mistaken. I am Chris Parrott,
I'm James Parrott.
and we are the day after what was another fantastic Grand Prix. France has been and gone. There was another epic battle between the two title protagonists. This time it was Verstappen prevailing over Lewis Hamilton with a penultimate lap overtake to take the lead. And there was all sorts of great action on the track throughout the field, wasn't there?
Yeah, uncharacteristically interesting France race, which just goes to show what context and uncertainty do to watching a race. Whereas, and just having two teams fighting at it, two very seemingly well-matched teams, although it's hard to say. It's hard not to say that Red Bull are definitely gaining the upper hand and are showing they might actually be pulling away a bit from what I've from as my intuitions. But it's what is, and it'd be interesting to see how Mercedes do react to it. But yeah, I feel like we're spoilt for races this season. It's been very, very exciting.
It has, and we've spoken before about uncertainty of outcome, and here you can make comparisons to the Spanish race in terms of strategy and how it played out, obviously with the roles being reversed. But I remember distinctly, and this was the general sense, I think, there was a certain amount of inevitability about what was going to happen with Hamilton catching Verstappen and being able to pass him. With the roles reversed in France, with Verstappen catching Hamilton, you really didn't know until the move happened what was going to happen. So you had uncertainty of outcome from lap one to the penultimate lap, right at the front, which is just super unusual and really exciting when it comes about. And I think it's interesting that now both these teams have played this card of making a bold early call to go for a two-stop, and where they've gone for that, it has paid off. And I wonder if either team is going to allow that to happen to them again, and if they do, what can you do if you're the cast that who stayed out to go for a one stop, and you've got a car on softer newer tires or just newer tires closing in on you, and is going to be in a position to pass with a certain number of laps to go. Is there anything you can do to counter that if you don't immediately come in to cover off the stop?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like with when we're, because both races, Spain and France, they've come about because tire wear, there's been slightly higher degradation than they thought would happen. So throughout all of the Spanish race, Spanish Grand Prix, Verstappen and Hamilton were both complaining about tire wear, saying they might not get to the end. And then luckily not luckily, Mercedes had had plan B, which was to go to a two-stop, planned out throughout the course of the weekend, it seemed, whereas Red Bull seemed very set on their one stop. And then again, in France, the two stop was a reaction to the fact that it seemed like the track temperature dropped much lower than they intended, and it just meant there was this graining process. They couldn't get tires up to temperature, and it meant the rubber was actually not contacting the road as well, and therefore was being ripped off in ways that they weren't expecting. And yeah, it seems like there are elements of the race engineers and the team in the paddock not listening to their drivers well enough. Because like Verstappen was saying, we're not going to get to the end in Spain. Bottas got irate when he got overtaken by Sergio Perez, because he'd been telling them for quite a while that this was a two-stop and they didn't listen to him. So maybe there's an element of trusting your drivers, and then when you kind of when you both go and make the two stops. So if Verstappen made a stop, then the lap after Hamilton did, he would have come up behind, but then they would have been racing on even tires, and it's just about how good the drivers are. And there's also there's a point that when you're following a driver with DRS, you're actually, unless you're kind car is so much faster when you're in P1, which it not necessarily is for Mercedes and Red Bull. Being that person in position 2 is almost more beneficial because you have that DRS option, whereas when you're in position in P1, you don't have that. So I think, yeah, I mean, I kind of think that it's, if you don't make that stop, you're just hoping for something that inevitably hoping for something to not happen that inevitably will happen. So I think you've just got to kind of react to it along with the team and just pit and then have a proper race on the same set, on the same tires, same level of degradation. Then it's just about the driver's skill. You're not like relying on the tires not wearing out as fast as you hoped.
I would agree. I would just add another wrinkle and an option, and I made this point after Spain as well, is to come in for a second stop, not immediately afterwards, but with enough left in the race that you think on fresher tires than the guy who's come in, that you could then catch him because you're running faster and you'll have a smaller gap to catch up than so to make that clearer. Once Verstappen came in and Mercedes didn't immediately respond, their best move was probably to bring Hamilton in with, I don't know, 10 laps to go, maybe put if they had a set of softs or even just going onto another set of mediums, whatever they were going to do. Either way, he would have newer tires than Verstappen and would have a smaller gap to make up over those final 10 laps. I think on Valtteri, if he actually plays out coming in for the 2-stop, he would have definitely at one stage been fourth on track again, possibly catching Perez with no guarantee that if he would catch him, he'd be able to pass him. So I think Valtteri's pace, he was headed for fourth no matter what happened. And if you look through the field, guys who really made the one-stop work, Perez, probably only really Perez and Norris. They did so because they were able to extend the first stint. Obviously, the two Aston Martins went for a one-stop, but they were doing the inverted strategy, starting on the hards.
Yeah, the alternate,
and so it was a different, it was just a completely different strategy. But only really Norris and Perez were able to make it work, and they did so by being able to extend that first stint. And at one stage, particularly for Norris, make it look like they were in a bit of no man's land, having sort of worked his way up into the points and suddenly be at the rear of that entire train of cars that he just passed. But such was his pace and the strength of the McLaren on Sunday, he was able to repass them all again, including his teammate. Another really good drive from Norris. I wonder, it's interesting about how much or how little the teams listen to the drivers and take their input. They've certainly been proven wrong on a few occasions by not listening to what the drivers said. But then, they just have so much more of a fuller picture of what's going on, sort of an omniscient view of the race and everything, whereas the driver has got sort of his point of view and his perspective. And you could argue it's the most important perspective because he's the one in the car, but they can't know everything that's going on in the way that the team is. So you can understand why they might feel like they're in a better position to make a call about what the best strategy to deploy is. We were watching the race together, which was good fun, and we both were discussing about how much of the team radio that we hear and how much of it is potentially coded messaging. And it's interesting to speculate about what the different messages mean. We sort of said it during the race, but it kind of, the way it played out, it seemed like they might have all actually been playing it with a straight bat in terms of the messages about the tires.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still scared. I think Bottas, yes. I think Hamilton definitely has his tires are gone code.
If he says these tires aren't going to last, that means,
I don't know. So that because there's loads of YouTube videos about how if you hear him say tires are gone, and then a few laps later or at some point he'll then start setting fastest laps on them again.
So that's like,
And
I'm
I
about to
understand.
go, guys.
Yeah, or it means something like he's managing his tires at the moment to be able to
Yeah.
push later on. And I have a feeling that that's what he was doing with in France, because he was actually at some points later on when he had like he was complaining about tires, but then he was able to set kind of like reasonably fast laps very late on. It just wasn't quite enough because there was just such a pace advantage on the new mediums for
Yeah.
Verstappen.
There was that period just after Verstappen passed Bottas where the gap stayed about 5 seconds for a few laps, and it looked like Verstappen had run out of tyre, maybe, and Hamilton had been saving it, like you suggest. But then I read from that, and we said this at the time, that Verstappen had learned from Bahrain not to, if he had, I can't remember how many laps he had, but if he's got 20 laps to catch up with Lewis, better preserve tyre life and you take up 19 laps to catch and pass him, rather than catch him up in 15 laps but have no tyres left. And I think that was a lesson he learned, and it was a very, very, very gradual and persistent and consistent chasing of him down. And the other thing, of course, that he didn't do in Bahrain was he took his first opportunity to pass.
Yeah.
So do you think so? Okay, Lewis, it's hammer time. That means take it easy, mate. Is that what we think?
No, I don't necessarily know if that's code, but I don't think anyone's wondering that, because it's always on an in lap or an out lap when he gets called hammer time, isn't it?
You hope that the teams don't get too particular about what is posted, because over the radio, because it's a really interesting insight, and even if a lot of it is coded messages, that's interesting in of itself.
Yeah.
But you must imagine that there must be some sort of conversations going on about behind the scenes about how difficult, what's the point in them having a team radio if they can't talk openly and honestly over it, because they know everyone's listening in on it, in terms of what its primary function is, to be able to talk between the driver and their team. If they're not able to because everyone's listening, you've got to wonder why, or if they're not making the point of, well, why do we have this?
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's lots of team radio that doesn't get shown, and it's the radio. It's only the interactions between the driver and the team, or the team and the race director. But any interactions within the team, they don't get published until after the race. So you're still able to make loads of decisions around strategy amongst the team, and then all you have to do is relay a message to your driver in a code that you understand. So I think there is enough for them to do to be able to kind of for it to still be of a benefit to them. But then I think they also have to accept that the insights gained for the fans, and the fans are what are paying for it all. The insights, well, that and very expensive track, like wealthy countries buying places to do.
We were laughing at Verstappen, who was not only having to sort of drive the car, close in on Lewis Hamilton, he also had to be his own sound engineer when he was able to, in terms of being asked to adjust his microphone, because they had poor radio situation. You would have expected him to go back and say, surely you've got someone on your end who can deal with this. I'm busy.
They just wanted him to physically adjust the mic in his helmet, and I'm like, I feel like you'd have to take your helmet off or use your tongue or lip or something to be able to adjust it. Yeah,
well, presumably he's not got a Britney Spears like microphone piece. It's all built into the helmet.
Yeah, it'd be embedded into the helmet. So,
so 7 rounds, 3 for Hamilton, 3 for Verstappen, in terms of wins, and people thought this might be a track that went back towards Mercedes, but I don't know what you think, but it seemed to me that it just showed that it's really close, and it may have favored, and it actually didn't appear to particularly favor them in a way that people thought, and it's really just sort of down to the drivers and the drivers executing.
Yeah, and kind of like strategy as well, because I mean, so Verstappen was on pole, then it was Mercedes at 2 and 3, and then Perez at 4. So that kind of shows to me that there is just the cars are very even, and all we're looking at is individual skill and then strategy. And I think, and I mean, I like Verstappen's on top now, like, but it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't as like clean sailing as it appears to be now. I mean, again, it's because it was kind of like a strategy, or well, not really a strategy error, but it just I mean, there were just decisions made this time around which Red Bull benefited on, which Mercedes probably lacked. So yeah, I think. Carry on.
In just talking about Mercedes error, I don't think they made an error in leaving Lewis out. I think they did make an error with trying to get Valtteri to undercut Verstappen rather than defending the lead, and compromise it. They compromised the time for Hamilton to make his pit stop to give Valtteri the opportunity to undercut Verstappen, or they didn't think through that. So they called Valtteri in. They would have, gaming it out. They would have known, okay, well, Red Bull will respond the next lap. They should have known the best thing for us to do is to come in on that lap as well. And they didn't. And I think everyone was surprised by how powerful the undercut was in France. But nevertheless, that was a mistake in my opinion. The other was just a strategy call that was a lap and a half away from working. And that's motor racing.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that Bottas had to pit early for a flat spotted tire, and that's what pushed Hamilton back. So again, I mean, it was a Mercedes error, but it was a driver error within Mercedes that perhaps caused the early one. I mean,
if that's true, there's a lack of wider context of the race, because he wasn't under threat from Perez at that point.
Yeah,
and you can deal with a flat spotted tire for a few laps. So again, either way, that's still them prioritizing the car that's behind rather than the car that's leading and protecting their win. And I think, it feels like Mercedes have been making more mistakes than usual. I don't know if that's true. It's just that it's very close, so they're penalized for the mistakes that they make more than they were in the past.
And they're having to make these decisions as well. So they've been forced into situations where they're having to make a decision. And I mean, if you haven't been used to that, there's a chance that you might not be making the right ones. And because now Red Bull are so strong, as you said, it just means that Red Bull can capitalize on Mercedes mistakes and their kind of fortune that they couldn't have before. And it wouldn't surprise me, because if next time we see one of these races where the deg is higher than was expected, and one of the teams proactively goes on a two-stop, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some kind of reaction this time, because we've had two examples of it just not working. And whether it's your kind of like a short blast of on the softs at the end that might work, or a kind of like a more immediate stop and then just like race it out. But it just wouldn't surprise me if there was some kind of reaction to it that there hasn't been in Spain or in France.
They all would have had a set of softs because they all started on the medium, didn't they?
Yeah, it was
a medium to hard race, wasn't it? So they would have had a set of softs. So they had that card in their pocket if they wanted to. They just didn't take it. And when we discussed the strategy off the back of Spain reacting to it by giving up the lead to then pursue, that's what Red Bull did in France. Verstappen was in the lead, and they thought, okay, well, regardless of what Mercedes do, the best thing for us to do is to come in, and we back Max to be able to catch and pass on the faster tires at the end. And that's a very brave call, to go. Not only did they give up the lead, they gave up second and third, but not third because Perez was in third. They gave up two positions and backed Max to be able to do it. And I think both Mercedes and Red Bull, with their lead drivers, have that flexibility because of the ability of the drivers to execute the race that is put in front of them by the strategy in a way that not every driver on the grid, or even in the team, frankly. I don't think Bottas could have done what Max did or Lewis did in Spain, and I don't think I don't think Perez could have done it either. No disrespect to them, they're just not on the level that Max and Lewis are this season. So I mean, obviously they've got a week to sort of dwell and ponder on it, and we don't know what kind of race Styria and Austria at the same circuit is going to be. But you might think traditionally, yeah, that's going to be a Mercedes circuit, but people thought La Castellet was going to be a Mercedes circuit. So I guess the answer to that is you just don't know.
No, I think that's the case, and I think it's just about. I mean, it's hard to know how much Mercedes can adjust or make changes to their setup, or make changes to their car in a week. But I think again, it just has to be down to kind of the cars are matched. I think it's just strategy, and where we've seen wins, in this way, it's just down to one team out thinking the other, which is kind of like how you want it to be. It's far more compelling to watch.
It takes me back to sort of 98, 99, 2000 era, where you had Ferrari, McLaren, and the cars were evenly matched. The drivers, Schumacher and Hakkinen, were evenly matched, and it was a lot of the time it was down to strategy and outmaneuvering the teams around sort of fuel strategy in those days. But it's an interesting dynamic, and it reinforces the fact that Formula One is a team sport. A fact that's often forgotten because we focus so much on the drivers, but it's very much a team sport, and we're seeing that this season because, of the 7 victories that there have been this year, strategy was key in, what are we thinking? Bahrain, it was key in Spain, and it was key in France, in terms of dictating a race win, and there are all sorts of other strategy elements down the grid there. So so this is a team competition, and that's being demonstrated by the strategy element in the racing this year.
And the teams that kind of have been doing well for the past few races that are so outside of Mercedes and Red Bull are ones that have got their strategy right, and so particularly someone like Aston Martin, both have done. I think in Baku and in France, they kind of went on a slightly alternate one. In Baku, they got fortunate with some safety cars and a red flag, but it still meant that they made up. I can't remember where was Vettel up qualifying in 11th, because he just missed out on Q3 and then up to second, and then here he qualified in 12th or 13th, got up to 9th, I think. Let me just get that right. Qualified in 12th, up to 9th. And likewise, Stroll going from 18th to 10th. And again, it was just kind of like a smart strategy, well executed by both the drivers, that enabled them to do it. And
they're getting everything they can out of the car. The team will be disappointed that is lower end of the points, and lower down from where they were last year, but they're now getting full bang for their buck from their drivers, which they weren't getting from Seb from the first 4 or 5 races. But he's got to grips with the car, he's got to grips with the team, and he's driving really well. Were you gonna have a joke? I was just looking at the grid. Yeah, Vettel was 12th, and Stroll, not setting a lap, basically, was 19th. And they both went on the alternate strategy, ran high in the points, and then came in and were both able to finish in the points. Team that went in the opposite direction, very surprisingly, was Ferrari, and 11th and 16th was a very poor return for 5th and 7th, I think, or was it 4th? 5th and 7th in qualifying on Saturday.
And it's a couple of. It's a weird one because you can see there are them. Well, it's probably, obviously they're not completely thinking about it as simply as I'm about to express it, but there seems to be some teams that are valuing the Sunday and some teams that are in a team that's valuing the Saturday. And obviously the Sunday is where you make your points, and we have We have so Aston Martin and like McLaren both are very good Sunday teams. They tend to make up places they've met in pretty much every race they've been in. And Ferrari seems to go the other way, and it's because they set up their car for very well for one lap, but so there was a new rule introduced this year. So it's parc fermé between qualifying and the race, before qualifying now. So whatever you do to your car, bar a few minor.
That's been a rule for a long time.
I thought they changed it this year.
They may have. I don't know if they changed elements of it, but you haven't been able to change the setup of your car once it rolls out on qualifying for a long time.
Okay, there must have been something I saw that meant it changed, but I think there was stuff around like engine modes or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've changed. Yeah. You're not allowed to run special qualifying engine modes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, scrap that point completely. But so Ferrari seems to be targeting.
Very much mistaken. That's fine.
Ferrari seems to be targeting the Saturday though. And maybe it's this idea that because it kind of goes back to again strategy and how you react, because perhaps there's an overemphasis on grid position in racing. So it's like grid position is most important. So if you qualify well, you're going to do well in the race, because track position where you are on track it's harder. It's too hard to overtake. So wherever you are, you should be able to finish quite easily. But actually, there's plenty of examples of being able to gain places without necessary overtakes, but just good strategy and well executed driving from the drivers, which means that you can race. And it must just be the case that the setup that Ferrari do that gets so much out of it for the qualifying, and that's why they always qualify well, just makes the car just makes it not a kind of like a racy car, which means they just don't get the points they need. It's all good qualifying high, but if they're dropping 10 grid places in a race because these are very good drivers. Charles Leclerc qualified in 7th, finishing in 16th. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think the car is clearly quick over one lap, and Charles Leclerc is particularly good over one lap. So it finds itself in some lofty territory at the start of the race. But it's, the drivers are very much outperforming the car, it seems, in those circumstances. And there are obviously certain tracks like Monaco and Azerbaijan where the characteristics of the circuit suit the Ferrari better, and that delta between its qualifying pace and its race pace is less pronounced. But the championship is certainly, in terms of the battle for third, is certainly playing out where McLaren's race pace advantage is coming to the fore. It just seems like they have a more consistent package, and Ferrari their peak performance might be quicker, and they've got some, pole in Monaco is, an example of that, but they're not able to consistently deliver that over the course of a weekend or weekend in and weekend out in a way that McLaren are able to, or particularly Norris, who's one of the, I don't know, he's one of the only drivers to have scored points in every race. He may be the only driver who's scored points in every race.
Oh, because of DNFs and Hamilton and terrible time in Baku.
And that consistency is kind of outdoing the peak performance of Ferrari, and it doesn't seem, Norris, he seems to have issues on Saturday where he's not quite performing as well as the team might hope, but that isn't costing him anything in the race, because he's able to deliver on Sunday and get the car back to where it needs to be, which is basically fifth. If Mercedes and Red Bull don't have reliability issues or have uncomplicated races, the best they can aim for is fifth. So if he's finishing in fifth or better, then he's basically doing, getting the most out of the car and out of and out of himself.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
guess so.
is still amazingly fourth in the championship and 17. What's that? Yeah, 17 points ahead of Bottas.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, yeah. So McLaren, you hear interviews of Ricardo and Norris talking about how the car is has a very weird personality. It's funny hearing drivers talk about them in this way. You'd love to know exactly what they're going through to be able to say something like the car has a strange personality to it, but they obviously know what they mean. And it seems like with the McLaren, the car's hard to drive on the limit, which is why they can't always get the best out of it on qualifying. But because of how you race nowadays, and how there are so many factors that go into how you drive the car, you rarely are driving on the limit in a race. You're either having to manage tires, or your strategy just doesn't require you to do that, or you might have to push for certain moments, but you don't really have to go for it like you would in qualifying. And maybe it just means that when they're allowed to ease off a bit during the race, they find it easier to drive, so they can drive it more consistently and get the best out of it. Whereas it seems like the Ferrari is kind of the opposite, and you can really drive it on the limit, but perhaps you can, because from what I heard, the clerks talking about it, it seems like the setup for driving the limit just means that when they're trying to do that all the way throughout the race, they just tire degradation is awful. And that's why Leclerc went in so early, because they set it up to drive fast, but obviously the faster you drive, the worse your degradation is going to be. So there just needs to be like a change in, it seems like a change in kind of like culture of how they set up their car to race, I suppose, because it's not getting what they can.
Yeah, and I think Ferrari have switched their focus now onto 2022. A lot of the teams would have done this already in terms of developing the car. So a lot of the cars are now what they're going to be for the rest of the season. So it's a case of refining your setups, refining the cars that you have, and trying to get the most performance out of them, or improve the characteristics with what you can, because you're not going to see major upgrades on a lot of these cars for the rest of the season. And looking at the constructors, it's there's a bit of daylight now between Red Bull at the top and Mercedes, and then McLaren's opened up a bit of a gap on Ferrari for third and fourth. Another what could easily have been unnoticed but key result from Sunday was George Russell's 12th, because that retook 9th place in the Constructors' Championship for Williams and jumped them ahead of Haas. And there's all sorts of important permutations around prize money for each position that you finish in. So that's an important result for Williams. And 12th in a car that is not good by anyone's estimation was a really good showing from Russell, given that he qualified in 14th, but I think in the early stages had dropped down as low as 19th. He had a very bad start to the race, was certainly behind his teammate, and had to fight his way back. And we obviously didn't see this in the race, but his last stint included on-track passes, I think, of Ocon and Tsunoda, or one of the two, and was closing in on Sainz towards the end. I think he was about 10 seconds or so. He was some distance behind Sainz, but it was a good showing from Russell. And had there been any kind of attrition ahead of him, that could have been Williams's first points of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because in seasons past, when it's been a Mercedes dominated season, actually a lot of the races you didn't see the Mercedes driving that much, because all the action was sort of happening in the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Whereas now we're with the top top few positions being so interesting, you almost miss out on some of the little battles that are going on outside of it. So even though we kind of can see Russell's done well, and normally with Russell we're used to him qualifying well and then dropping down to where actually the pace of the car is. So for him to qualify, obviously he's always qualifying well, but this time there was actually the race pace of the car to make him gain some positions.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's some encouragement there for Williams, because there was talk about it was sensitive to wind, and I think it was quite a windy day. It was noted this on the Sky Sports coverage, that I think Rosberg was having a hair malfunction because he was randomly wearing a very unfashionable, particularly for him, Sky Sports branded baseball hat. And Verstappen, who's that? Mazepin and Verstappen running into each other. Verstappen's mistake on the first corner of the race was due in part, I think, to a crosswind.
Tailwind.
Or a tailwind, yeah, whatever it was, wind in some sort of direction, something which you would usually, or so far this season, has affected Williams quite badly. But it was Russell's strongest race of the year for them, and it was a more typical track. So I think it suggests that there are going to be other opportunities for Williams and Russell in particular this year on other tracks, possibly even in Austria coming up, where they could be there to pick up some scraps in terms of points if there's some attrition in front of them. They don't have the outright pace, I think, to score points, but you only need a few DNFs when you're in 12th to be picking something up there. So it was a good drive for Russell.
Yeah, and so I read an article the other day, and I realised why Nicholas Latifi has a seat at Williams. Do you know how much money he brings with him to the team each year?
More than a few quid, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was touted at 30 million a year.
Well, that'll do it.
Yeah, that's like that is like definitely changeable. That changes the team's like finances, which are bringing.
Well, I would imagine
money,
that keeps them afloat, to be honest. That amount of
money.
That's a sizable chunk of change.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm reading the Maurice Hamilton's Williams book, which is very good, and it's an illustration of just how much graft went into that team and establishing it, and the amount of work that Frank Williams did to get it off the ground. And it was illuminating, because when I first started watching Formula One in the mid 90s, Williams were the top dog. They were the Mercedes of the sport then, and so all you saw was the end product and the success, and you didn't see or hear about all of the graft that went into it, where he was basically sort of a second-hand F1 car salesman when he first got into the sports, and guys were looking for cars to enter into Grand Prix, and he was the person who would pick up a chassis from Brabham or an engine from some random Italian developer and stick them together and make a racing car. But also, in reading that, for teams like those, and for Williams when they first started, they survived on finding drivers who could bring some money with them, and listening to podcasts like the Beyond the Grid one with Tom Clarkson. He interviewed Ivan Capelli last weekend, and Capelli he got into Formula One because he found a financial backer in Leighton House. I forget the name of the Japanese who brought the money with him, but that was the thing that got him into Formula One. It has always been a part of the sport, and it's not. Yeah. There may have been a lull in it when there was a lot of manufacturers in the sport, and that's where the money was coming from. You had the combination of still a bit of tobacco money, but then you had these big manufacturers, BMW, Honda, Toyota, were all in the sport. There was perhaps then less of a need for paid drivers, so they kind of went away, and that built this perception that paid drivers were a new phenomenon, but they're not. It's always been a part of the sport, and it's not something to scoff at. And to be honest, if you look at the quality of the grid, you've got how many world champions is it? You've got Hamilton, Vettel, Alonso. Are there any others? That's it, isn't it? You've got three world champions in the grid: Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, really talented young drivers, Danny Ricciardo, Lando Norris. Kimi Raikkonen as well, another world champion, 4 world champions. It's a really strong grid, and yeah, there's there might be one or two drivers who are potentially pound per pound better or should be racing, someone like Nico Hulkenberg, but then, you can make an argument that he had his chance and never really took it. So I think in terms of the quality of the grid, that Formula One's in a really good place. And it's even made better for the rookies, making mistakes and jazzing things up a little bit. I don't see any issue with.
Yeah, I mean, there was a interesting Drive to Survive episode where essentially Gunther Steiner, the team principal of Haas, got a call from Gene Haas to essentially say, you're going to have to find someone to put money into it because I'm not putting any more money into this team. I can't afford it. And then Gunther Steiner's role as a team principal just essentially had to completely change, and he just went into a salesman, and he was just grafting constantly to try and make sure that the team that he managed and the people that he employed were able to keep employed for the foreseeable future. Yeah. And there was like talk about them only releasing one driver and getting one driver in to pay for it. But then I think the opportunity for Mick Schumacher to drive for them was obviously the name, and Mick Schumacher brings money with it too, because of his name and because of the sponsorship deals that come with it. And then obviously Nikita Mazepin's dad financing them to race. You kind of just you think if it like it has to, well, yeah, they don't really have a choice, and the ramifications of not getting these drivers in, if
well, there'd only be 10 cars on the grid probably.
Yeah, of not getting paid drivers in would be so huge that it's kind of like a thing that we have to put up with.
I don't even think you have to put up with it. I just think it's because none of them are idiots. They can all drive. People give Mazepin a hard time, and he's made a lot of mistakes, and not just fans, drivers have given him a hard time as well for things that he's done. But it's tough, and you are rookies and you make rookie mistakes because it's tough and because you're new to it.
But I mean, put up with it in a sense that we'd obviously rather that the best drivers were able to drive. So we kind of just say, yeah, okay, fair enough. If people have to pay for their seat because it enables teams to run and the sport to be interesting and people to be employed, then yeah, we put up for it in that sense. But obviously it's actually no skin off our back. We don't have to do much to put up with it. The only thing we have to do is just say, oh yeah, we'd rather their best drivers are on the grid, but in some cases it just can't happen. So
I think it gets a bit, and it's certainly happened in the best example of this, I think, is Jordan in '93, where they had Barrichello in one seat, and then the other seat was a revolving door of different drivers who could raise a bit of money to drive. It was basically literally a seat for hire, and whoever could offer the most money was given it that weekend. That feels a little bit, you wouldn't want to be in that situation, but the present situation is a nice balance, and it's not a flippant point to say that there'd only be 5 teams in Formula One. There probably would only be 5 teams without paid drivers. So many teams' budgets are on a knife edge, and it's crucial money that they bring in.
And then there's obviously the teams that don't have paid drivers but don't pay for their drivers because they're contracted at one of the biggest teams. So I mean, it's just like F1 economics is tough. And that's why they're having to put in so many new rules and like budget constraints and standardized parts and things like that for next season, because it did get a bit out of hand for the past 7 years, and to try and level the playing field, make it a bit easier on the teams. I think
if it's
a good thing.
There are sort of 2 key tests for the new regulations next year. I think one is, well, maybe 3, and the third one is more of a personal point. But one is obviously, is the racing good? And what's interesting about 2021 is we've kind of seen that you need close competition rather than between the teams, rather than focusing on sort of like aerodynamics, which has been, everyone said the reason why there isn't good racing is because the cars are difficult to overtake each other. Well, we've kind of seen this year that that's not really the main problem. The problem is that you had one team that was really very much better than everyone else, and it didn't matter how close it was for the rest of the grid. And last year the battle behind Mercedes was a lot closer than it is this year in terms of the battle behind Red Bull and Mercedes, because last year you had Renault were in the fight, McLaren were in the fight, Ferrari were jumping in there. You had Racing Point as well. You had 4 teams who were consistently, that third best team, depending on the circuit, depending on the weekend. Whereas this year it's down to 2 really. And even then you kind of get the feeling that one's good on a Saturday, one's good on a Sunday, as we've discussed. But none of that really mattered because Mercedes was so much better than everyone else. So yes, there was good racing, but we knew who was going to win. And this year has demonstrated that, really the cars as they are exciting and racy. You've just got to have that close competition. So basically the key point there is there good competition between all of the teams? And I look at that in two ways. If you want 5 teams that could realistically win a race, each, depending on the circumstances, and then you want every team to realistically be able to score points in every race, depending on the circumstances. So if the season looks like that, where, the whole grid is compressed and then the top half are compressed as well, in terms of relative performance, then that's kind of a key test for the new regulations. That was 1 and 2 kind of rolled into one. And my third sort of point is that the cars just look a little better and are more simpler and easy and more relatable too. Formula One car's got to be something that a young girl or boy wants to have a poster of in their room, and no one wants a poster of a Formula One car on their walls at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
they just look strange and ugly, frankly. And it sounds like a glib point, but I think it is an important thing that cars look good, as well as race good.
Yeah, I mean, if the new car regs do have as big an effect on the aerodynamics and therefore the dirty air as it says they will, I have a feeling that we'd have realized that actually we enjoyed the racing so much this season because it's just been so much closer than last season. But then it might be the case that in 2022 we're seeing close racing in terms of in the standings, and also the on-track action might be so much better that we'd be thinking, how did we put up with the stuff we've been putting up with for the past 7 years? And I mean, I hope that's the case, because if we can have exciting racing on track and the context being close and exciting, then I mean, I would say
that I would actually want the racing next year to be as good as it is this year, but you don't need DRS to be able to pass people. So whatever. So they make up whatever performance loss you have following another car to get racing to the same level it is now in terms of difficulty of passing. They get it to the same point it is now, but the DRS is taken out of the equation, so you can run close enough to be able to make the kind of passes that you see currently, but without DRS, because a lot of the times it's circuit characteristics are such that it's just difficult to overtake. Doesn't matter how many DRS zones you put in there, and that's just a fact of life. So you're always going to have races where there isn't a lot of overtaking, but on the races that you do have it, which is more than not in the DRS era, thankfully, it would be great if you could maintain that, but without the need for DRS, because it just feels a bit more authentic. An overtake feels a bit more authentic.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably going to have to think about this actually, because it might be the case that with the new regs making it so much easier to follow closely around kind of the fast and medium speed corners, that the gains from having DRS might end up being too strong. So for instance, in France, I think DRS gave you 0.7 per lap on someone without DRS. Do you need that when you've not lost 0.7 trying to follow someone in dirty air? So yeah,
I don't think they've made a
probably,
decision on it. I think from what I've last read, they're going to see how it works, isn't that?
Yeah, and they would only be wise to, because obviously they've done testing on the cars and like that are going to be run next year, but they'll only really know how they race when they can get 20 cars out there. But it might be, yeah, I mean, you can see, I mean, I imagine they'd have to do some sort of testing purely for DRS in a race context before a race, or they might be picking one race, so their first race, and they'll see how big an impact it's had. But no, it'll be interesting to see.
So drifting, looking a bit further ahead, I am going to, well, so long as, COVID, etc. I'm going to Silverstone for the Grand Prix, but I'm going on Saturday. And it was interesting. My thought process was, because I was looking at the prices and the tickets, I thought Sunday is quite expensive to go. So I'm not sure about that. But then I was like, oh, there's going to be a race on Saturday. So yeah, that's actually quite good value. And I just thought it was interesting, being, playing that through as a fan and as a punter, and how that kind of committed me to thinking, actually, no, I will go. I will pay that to go, because you'll get to see a race. And gaming that through, it's kind of and reflecting on sprint race qualifying, I think that it's going to be definitely good for the fans that attend the races, because you just get more bang for your buck on a Saturday. I don't know that the event itself will necessarily actually be very exciting, but I think it will probably make the overall weekend better. So it might sort of stay in on default. I think the only way they might not keep it, to be honest, is if the race on Sunday is worse, because a lot of overtaking that would have happened on Sunday happens on Saturday instead.
Yeah, I mean, and you think that also from the viewer at home, you'd probably be more inclined to sit down to watch a race on a Saturday. I mean, although the thing is, Sunday F1 is a very kind of like Sunday sport as a TV watcher, because it's a bit more of a relaxed watch for most people. You're kind of there enjoying the race, taking it in. It's not like watching football or rugby where you kind of get excited by certain like intensely excited by certain moments. It's kind of like a relaxed thing to do on a Sunday. So
there's more of a crescendo and a build up to sort of key moments, isn't there? Like you're sort of quite chill, like that chase for Verstappen onto Hamilton. You're kind of a moment's coming, and sort of you see him closing in, and then gets to Bottas, and you're like, okay, this is important. Does he get past him quickly? And he did. And then can he close him in? And then it looked like he wasn't, and then he does start to reel him in, and it's like, okay, he's getting to him. Has he got enough time to pass him? So yeah, it's kind of ebbs and flows in a way that it's more like a cricket match in that respect, I suppose, than football definitely. Or rugby, where sort of cricket, you're kind of like sort of waiting for a wicket, or someone's approaching a milestone, they're in the 80s, and you're like, oh, are they going to get to 100? And then they go on 99, like, okay, is he going to do it? And then they do. But obviously it's played out over an hour and a half instead of 5 days.
Yeah, but no, that should be exciting. Interesting to see how it pans out. Yeah, I can't imagine them. I can't see how they would get rid of it, because it just seems like there are quite a few upsides that I think, obviously, what you've just said there. I mean, it is funny though, because Silverstone is probably the one weekend where you don't need to worry about selling tickets for the Saturday and the Friday.
Yeah, it's always very well attended.
So yeah,
I've always much preferred. I've always really enjoyed all of the days, and sort of Friday just sort of roaming around and finding different places to watch the different action that's going on. And on Saturdays and Friday and Saturday, I think you can sit in any grandstand, and it's only on Sunday where you have to sit in a certain grandstand if you've got a grandstand ticket, that is. Friday, I think you can sit anywhere. So
I can't remember. I remember we always seem to just take deck chairs whenever
Yeah.
we were there and get
Or
up
you can just do that.
obscenely
Yeah.
early. Yeah.
Yeah. Just so long as you just have to get there sort of 7 a.m., sort of 7 hours before the race starts, which is quite a long lead time compared to
Yeah,
other sports, but there's a lot going on.
it's all part of it anyway. You know,
Yeah.
you know what you're getting in for.
Any other business?
Don't know. Are there anyone we've congratulated Russell? I don't know if anyone else. I mean, still, it's good to see both Aston Martins racing well. Who else would I like to congratulate? No, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, no, I've covered everything I'd like to.
Yeah. So one race into a triple header, another 2 to go. So we'll be back next week. For part one of Styrian Grand Prix. So this is the extra race, isn't it? Because that they put in between.
The replacement
yeah,
race.
But in terms of where it's slotted in the calendar, this is slotted in that gap that was between France and Austria.
Yeah.
And it's almost Formula One coming full circle in COVID, where the 2020 season started with an Austrian double header, and we've now hit that point in the 2021 season. And reflecting on it, Formula One's in a very different place given how dominant Mercedes were last year, and how the championship battle is shaping up this year. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out this weekend.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So enjoy the race, and we look forward to hearing from us next week on Very
Much
Mistaken.